Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. It is me, Joey P, Joe Pisapia, and today with me is Kyle Yates and a wonderful guest, the Oracle. Matthew Freedman joins us from FTN, so we're excited to have him there. Who better to talk about the future with than an Oracle? That's what I always say. So hopefully the crystal balls will be on the table for Matthew Freedman, along with some bold predictions. And we're going to go ahead and break down the quarterbacks today and the tight ends. That's right. In case you missed it last week, we went through the running backs and the wide receivers, our early 2022 rankings. Obviously, free agency hasn't happened yet. The Super Bowl hasn't happened yet. So this is just a quick look kind of where the board is, and you can apply some of this to your dynasty if you want to a little bit. Apply some of this to your keeper leagues also. But it's a good practice, I always think, Matt, to kind of sit back after the year's over and kind of give that first take of evaluation of where you think each position board is, because I think sometimes that first take might be the right one.
Yeah, it's, there's the first take, and then, so it's, it's a good exercise, but then also people are already looking ahead, for dynasty leagues, but then also best ball leagues, people are starting to really get on that horse for 2022. So it's more than just an exercise. Like, we've got to have these rankings in pretty decent shape.
Yeah, absolutely. And Yates, I know when it comes to the quarterback rankings and the way Superflex has grown, my favorite format of all the formats, these quarterback rankings are more important than ever because you've got a lot of second-year quarterbacks here in the league. Didn't all work out in their rookie season, obviously, so how we evaluate them is going to be very tricky, but I think very important because we're also seeing a bunch of quarterbacks leave the NFL. Brady's gone, Roethlisberger's gone. Last year we lost Breeze. Who knows what's going on with Aaron Rodgers and a few others. So there is a feeling, I would say, of transition in this position. Would you agree?
I absolutely agree. And this is, I'm sure we'll talk about it when we get to these guys, but there's a lot of movement that could play out this season. And especially too, when you look at the incoming class, there's not necessarily the top tier guys in the 2022 NFL draft class, but there's a lot of them. There's a lot of guys that are kind of in the same group. So 2 or 3 of those guys could find their way into starting positions in week 1. And that could alter how we view some of these other guys here, especially in the low end QB2 range. None of these guys are going to come in and instantly be top 10, top 12 guys, but there's going to be a lot of movement. Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, like there's a lot of pieces that could be on the move here at the quarterback position. So I think it's important right now, as we still have the season fresh in our minds, to stop and think back and just kind of remember and lock some stuff into place that we want to make sure that we remember when we're talking about these guys in July and August next year.
No, you're right, too. It is early, but, I mean, at the same time, it's never too early to start evaluating this talent because it's a work in progress. That's what I love about rankings, just generally speaking. This is all a big work in progress, and trying to get our own thoughts out there before the groupthink always takes over, too, because that can be a very difficult thing for any analyst or anybody playing, too, is having the passion and the fortitude to kind of stick by your own thoughts, and evaluating the quarterback position to me is the most important thing. To me, you understand the quarterback, you understand the offense, and then you understand how they can help you with your fantasy team. Now, before we get going with those obvious ranks for the quarterbacks and tight ends, I want to tell you about the Super Bowl stuff we got going on here because we've got something for you. We know the game is just a few days away here, but if you head over right now to bettingpros.com/offers, we've got an outstanding list of incredible offers there if you want to go ahead and wager on the Super Bowl. Basically, any of the offers there consist of $20 or lower to bet the Super Bowl, and if you win, when you can earn basically between $150 to $300 depending on the sports book and those offers that you choose. So there's no catch. You just go over to bettingpros.com/offers and check out the offers, see which one's for you, see which ones are available wherever you live, and go ahead and put a little action on the game. Have some fun when you're sitting around there. I already have action on the Bengals. We're going to be covering on Betting Pros all week here. We've got 2 shows lined up for props. We've got another show lined up for just evaluating the Super Bowl itself. It's going to be a lot of exciting stuff, but we want you to be part of this experience. And just because, you want to have some fun wager doesn't mean you have to spend thousands of dollars to do it. So if you go over to bettingpros.com/offers, you have a chance to get involved and have some fun around the Super Bowl time because let's be honest, the Pro Bowl is not exciting. We all knew that wasn't going to be a thing. Also, I want to remind everybody, too, every single podcast we do and in the off-season, all the great content we have here, whether it be long videos, short videos, or anything in between, we've got over our YouTube channel at youtube.com/fantasypros. So make sure you subscribe. And when you do, click that little notifications bell, please, because every time it rings, Chris gets very excited, and it's such a joy to see Chris happy because typically he's miserable. And, he needs that little kind of ding here and there, and it just brightens up his day. I kid. Chris is my favorite person on the planet. I love Chris. He's our esteemed producer here and does incredible work. When you watch a video here, Chris is the guy behind it. So please support us and the team here at Fantasy Pros and subscribe to our YouTube channel that's growing every single day. Speaking of growing, the quarterback list is growing, and a lot of questions are growing there. Before we get to the top 24 guys, Matt, I want to ask you, who is it that just missed this group for you? And again, we're talking kind of in that super flex range here, and give me a guy that you struggled with, you wanted to crack that top 24, but at the end of the day, just fell a little short.
I'm going to be honest. The answer is none. I don't have any desires about any of these guys. So Jimmy Garoppolo, I have at number 25. Like, we don't know where he's going to be. Matt Ryan after him, like devoid of weapons. Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff, with so much unsettled at this point in the calendar, it's really hard to say definitively, once guys are outside of the top 24, what's going on with their situation. So it's just sort of this massive uncertainty. And so the situation is unknown for a lot of these guys, but what we do know about them is that they're pretty mediocre. And so I don't really have much interest in the veterans. Mm-hmm. What I will say is that some of these rookies, they're kind of interesting. Like, if we get someone like Malik Willis, let's say he's drafted in the first round and it looks like he's going to be starting right away. He's a guy that I think will automatically get in the top 24, but I can't really put him there right now. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Sure. So I would say he's the one that I really think of because he's got that dual threat capability. We saw it his past 2 years in college. I think he has sufficient arm strength. We saw him play pretty well in Senior Bowl practices. If he is a starter in his rookie season, he's a guy that I will be putting in my top 24. But after him, right now, there's no one outside of the top 24 that I really wish I could have put in that group.
Now, Matt, you and I have been doing this a long time, and I think you'll probably understand what I'm going to lay down here. We thought last year was the uber quarterback class, right? We always hear this thing, oh, this is such an incredible class. And then this year we're heading into it, and everyone's saying, this is not the same class, and everyone's kind of, suppressing all of that. Don't you feel like whenever that gets suppressed, that ends up being a class that's really good and exceeds expectations? And the one that always can't miss is unbelievable. We get a bunch of Baker Mayfields and Josh Rosens, it feels like.
Maybe. I mean, I can see that, but let's be honest. This class is pretty nasty.
It is. It's not as good.
Not one of these guys would have been drafted ahead of any of the 5 first rounders last year. So I see your point. It is taken, but man, this is not a class that I want to have anything to do with on the quarterback front, with the exception of maybe Malik Willis because of his dual threat capability.
All right, Yates, who just missed the cut for you at QB 24?
I feel like you could take Freedman's argument, cut and paste it on mine. Like, even as he was talking, I was like, okay, well, I could talk about Malik Willis and like him coming into next year and potentially being that top 20 guy because of his rushing ability. And yeah, so I mean, literally everything that Matt said is correct. None of these guys, I mean, even at 24, I've got Baker Mayfield. And like, do I feel great about having Baker Mayfield inside my top 24 quarterbacks? No, I don't. So once we get past that, it's the Jameis Winston. Does he get another shot somewhere else? Daniel Jones, what is he going to look like? Does he have competition? Do we see Mitchell Trubisky work his way back into potentially signing with New York and they have a quarterback competition? Really, it gets pretty gross once you get past the top 20 guys. I'll classify it as that. So I think that, we'll have some of these guys that fall into great situations. If one of these quarterbacks falls to Denver, they don't make the Aaron Rodgers move and they fall and they go get Kenny Pickett out of Pitt or something like that, then I think that we could be talking about him as a low end QB2. But really the only guy that I could see forcing his way into the top 20 is Malik Willis, the quarterback out of Liberty. Incredible mobility, extremely raw, extremely wide range of outcomes for this player. So he's someone who should sit next year. But he might not. So there's a lot to be evaluated there, but he would be the only one that would crack the top 20 for me.
Yeah. One name I will add as a massive caveat. I doubt he actually gets a starting role, but if somehow Taysom Hill with Sean Payton no longer in the league, I don't see how this guy gets a starting role anywhere. But if he gets a starting role, then obviously with the dual threat ability, he's someone who would be I'd say in the top 18, maybe even, if he starts significant time, he ends up producing like a top 12 quarterback. But I mean, with all the certainty surrounding him in his situation, you can't draft him that way.
No, of course. Baker Mayfield was at 25 for me. He just missed my top 24. And if you go back and look at the second half of 2020, he was very good. Some of the stats in that season, there were a couple games with a win, greatly impacted those games. You couldn't throw the football, period. And then the second half, he actually started to look like he was evolving, and the team went to the playoffs. And then this year, so many injuries. This is a really important make or break season here for Baker Mayfield. So that's the one guy for me that I feel like he could crack it, and all of a sudden he could become a pretty reliable, safe QB2 guy for me. But again, it's the health, and certainly the organization, I think, right now is kind of in a dividing line right there with Baker Mayfield. Will he be the guy, or is it time to start looking for another one? In the meantime, let's look for Matt Freedman's guys here, and we'll start over at 24. Daniel Jones, of all people, cracks the list, and then Zach Wilson at 23, Carson Wentz at 22, Tua at 21, Jameis Winston at 20, Trevor Lawrence at 19. My mind and my eyes automatically go to Winston. So talk to me about why you think so far Winston is a top 20 quarterback. Sell me, Matthew Freedman.
I mean, it's about upside at this stage in the rankings. And I think if he returns to New Orleans, or let's say he returns to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, like, I think he's got a decent chance of starting this upcoming year. And if he does, I like him ahead of these guys who are lower on the list. Tua, Carson Wentz, like, we've seen what he's done, even in a pretty good situation this past year, and it wasn't anything special. Zach Wilson maybe has some upside. Daniel Jones, maybe some upside, but we've seen Winston have the ability really to air it out. So this is just sort of like a connecting the dots. Tom Brady is gone. Maybe Winston returns to Tampa Bay, a pretty decent situation for him there. Maybe he has a top 12 kind of season within his range of outcomes if he's the starter, but I think that's better than what we might see out of any of the guys I have ranked underneath him.
I would be absolutely shocked to see him go to Tampa again, but I think he's going to have a job somewhere, man. I agree 100%. There's just too many openings at the quarterback position where somebody's going to give this guy another chance. And look, I mean, if they put him in an offense where they allow him to throw the football, we know he can do that. It's just a matter of the mistakes, understanding that. And I kept saying this too, I really wish we had a bigger sample size of him with New Orleans, Matt, because it felt like, in that Bruce Arians offense, it's push the ball downfield all the time. And that always leads to mistakes. You saw Brady make some mistakes sometimes, very un-Brady-like moments. That's always the thing. I wish if he had just stayed healthy this season, I think I'd feel much better about Winston, but you're 100% right. He's going to get an opportunity somewhere else. Talk to me about the New York guys at 23 and 24, Zach Wilson and Daniel Jones. Do you think that there's room for either of these two guys to grow and move up this list?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's room for Wilson to grow. I would say just like maturing as a passer, second season in the league, second season with continuity on the coaching staff, learning the system of LaFleur, and then, maybe they get another wide receiver in the draft. If they don't, I still think Elijah Moore has the potential to be a kind of spicy wide receiver one, in reality and also in fantasy. Braxton Berrios is a decent middle of the field option, assuming that Jamison Crowder is gone. Corey Davis is a decent number 2 receiver in, that offense. Like, he actually could develop. I'm not betting on it, but like, you can see the path to it happening. And then Daniel Jones, you're just thinking that, he was kind of compared to Josh Allen entering the league. Maybe he has, with Brian Daboll as his head coach, some sort of magic to where he stops turning the ball over and maybe he runs a little bit more. Because he does have the ability to pick up yards out of the pocket as a runner. And so maybe he leans into that a little bit more. And, maybe we see Kadarius Toney kind of develop into something of a reliable weapon. They do have receiving capability in that offense. Maybe it all kind of aligns in that Brian Daboll system. So I can see the upside with those guys, but I'm not betting on it. And I think there's like a pretty significant downside with both of those guys too.
I know it's so early to ask this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because it's the way too early ranking. So I might as well do it. There's a lot of rumors going around here in the New York area where I am that Kadarius Toney, Saquon Barkley are all up for grabs, potentially into trade. How does moving on from those players potentially, in your mind, change the dynamic of a Daniel Jones in fantasy?
With Saquon Barkley, not at all. I don't think, I'm not to say like running backs don't matter, but like that offense is basically going to do what it does. And if Barkley is gone, I still think they, probably. I mean, I don't think much changes, honestly. Like,
no, it's fair.
I think they kind of do Daniel Jones in the passing game, but Kadarius Toney, that's the one that would worry me a little bit more, to be honest, because I wasn't a Kadarius Toney stan by any means when he was entering the league. Like you saw the raw potential, but he had a late breakout age, kind of a tweener type of player. But man, he had some games last year where he just looked like he was going to ball out and be a league winning type of player. And then the injury struck, but I would not trade Kadarius Toney if I'm the Giants. If they trade him, it's still, he's one player. Think of the best wide receivers in the league. If you take him out for a game, what does that do to the spread? Maybe 1 point. So like, I don't think it's going to be a massive impact on Daniel Jones if Kadarius Toney is traded, but that's one less weapon.
All right, let's shift gears over to Yates' group. We'll start from 24 to 19 for him. Baker Mayfield at 24, then Zach Wilson at 23, Trevor Lawrence at 22, Matt Ryan at 21, Mac Jones at 20, and 19, Carson Wentz. I want to talk about some of these second-year QBs. Let's start with Trevor Lawrence here. So far, your thoughts on Trevor Lawrence's ability to kind of shake off the dust, Yates, of a disappointing rookie campaign and obviously a lot going around surrounding him, and just taking a deep breath and refocusing. I feel like he could be one of the great values in Superflex going into next year. What do you think of that?
He absolutely could. You look at Trevor Lawrence, who I've got at 22, Zach Wilson, who I've got at 23. Both of these guys have ridiculous upside. They could easily prove this ranking incredibly wrong by the time that we get to, a couple weeks into the season. They could come out and just prove that incredibly wrong. However, they fall into the territory for me where I've got to see it first. I have to see Trevor Lawrence with Doug Peterson as the head coach. I need to see what this offense looks like. And then Zach Wilson, I need to see a lot of improvement. I had Zach Wilson as QB4 in last year's class, so it was a lot lower on him than where he ended up going in the NFL draft. I thought that he was incredibly raw, needed a lot of developing. Was this first year that growing pains for him? Was that situation where he needed to go through those learning instances? And did he take the necessary steps? That's something that I need to see before I rank him above some of these other guys that are higher on the list. So Trevor Lawrence absolutely could be a top 12 quarterback next year. It could happen if we have a competent and capable coaching staff, like at least a decent, stable organization around him. Like, it could happen, but it's one of the things where I need to see it first before I bump him in my top 20.
The bar is incredibly low right now in Jacksonville. I mean, really, it's like underground. It's submarine. It's like that episode of South Park where James Cameron's trying to raise the bar. That's what it feels like right now. I want to ask you about Mac Jones, too, who you've got all the way up at 20, another second-year quarterback. Had a pretty good showing out of the gate. Is there room for growth here, or is this kind of where he's going to lie for you? If they give him a big-time wide receiver, maybe have some nice pieces added in here in the draft, do you think there's actually a little bit more of an uptick potential for Mac Jones, or is this kind of what you expect from him? A game-managing quarterback, he's going to make some good throws when he needs to, he's going to probably progress at a certain point in time, but he's never going to crack that QB1 tier.
For me to rank him here at 20, this actually, like, yes, he has the potential if they do get that big play wide receiver. If they have, Jameson Williams from Alabama, he falls to them in the first round and they take him. Like,
sign me up for that.
Can
I have
where
that? I'd
we
love
really
that. I
see
want that.
Mac Jones, his production take another step, because it's something what he had at Alabama. He just needs to get the ball into the hands of his playmakers, and we know that he can do that. However, for me to rank him here at 20, which I think is going to be a little bit lower than where you guys have him, I haven't looked, but for him to be at 20, he just lost Josh McDaniels as his offensive coordinator, as his play caller. And I think that we need to place a ton of importance on that, right? With Mac Jones coming out of Alabama, he fell into an amazing situation. You look at Justin Fields with Matt Nagy, terrible situation. Trey Lance in San Francisco, he didn't even get to play. Zach Wilson wasn't exactly the best situation with the New York Jets. That team wasn't very good. Jacksonville, we already know that. We just talked about that situation. So Mac Jones was able to produce the best numbers from the rookie class last year because he fell into a great situation. Offensive line was stout. It was a great offensive line. And then you had Josh McDaniels as the play caller. Now, how do they replace that? That's something that I think we need to talk a little bit more about Mac Jones as we move into the future, where if he doesn't have that innovative play caller, that really, really top-notch play caller, say what you will about Josh McDaniels as a head coach and, in him getting a second try in Las Vegas, he's a good play caller. So I think that's something that we really need to take into account as we rank Mac Jones moving forward. there's a lot of volatility there. We might not see the same level of production unless we see them really invest in the wide receivers and, and upgrade over Nelson Aguilar and Kendrick Bourne and those kind of guys.
Unless they just, bring back Bill O'Brien again into that role from Alabama and, just kind of circle the wagons as the Patriots are wont to do. All right, my grouping here at 24, Jared Goff cracks the top 24. I feel gross about this, but I like Amon-Ra St. Brown. I like Swift. I like this offense. A healthy TJ Hockenson. I kind of like where things are going there. I can't believe I'm saying this. And I don't like Goff, but I feel like at 24, he's got to crack that right now just because of default. Then you've got Zach Wilson at 23, who I do think can move up this list. Carson Wentz at 22. Matt Ryan, old, reliable, but boring. Matt Ryan at 21. Tua at 20. Ryan Tannehill at 19. I've got Tannehill very low. I don't like the turnover situation. I can't remember a time where I was so high on a quarterback and then so low on him basically 6 months later. It's just a terrible situation there. And I understand, yes, he didn't have the healthy wide receivers. I get that, but still, there were a lot of issues there going on besides that. I want to ask you guys about Carson Wentz, though, because I've got him at 22. You've got him at 22, Matt. And you've got him all the way at 19, Yates. So, Matt, I'm going to start with you with this Carson Wentz question. All the way up at 19 with a bullet, baby. But hear me out here, because it was a slow start to the year. He had the foot issue, he had the COVID issue. Then there was a period in the middle where it looked like things were clicking, going the right way. And then towards the end, not so good. So, Matt, I'm going to ask you this question. Where do you expect Carson Wentz to be here in his second year with the Colts, if indeed he is with the Colts again in year 2?
Right where I have him at number 22. Now, I'm going to call it. He's going to finish the year as the number 22 quarterback.
Love it.
But no, I think he's in that range where he could have some peak performances, especially when he has really great matchups. But otherwise, I think this is going to be a very Jonathan Taylor focused offense. And so if Carson Wentz isn't really all that great of a quarterback in reality, and if he's not going to get a lot of opportunities throwing the ball, and if he's not as much of a runner at this point in the career, it's like, what am I investing in? I think there's a significantly capped ceiling with him, which is why I have him at number 22 after Jameis Winston. Like, the odds are that Carson Wentz scores more fantasy points this year than Jameis Winston. But at this stage, where we're looking at guys outside of the top 12, top 16 at the quarterback position, I'm looking a little more at upside, and I just do not see the upside with Carson Wentz.
Yates, do you see any upside with Carson Wentz, or is he just a matchup guy and nothing more at this point?
I think he falls into that territory where he's kind of a matchup guy, but also like that's kind of where we're at with these guys that are in the low end QB2 territory, where a lot of them are matchup guys, or they have to take massive strides in development to crack that, into a larger territory. So I think with Carson Wentz, it's going to be interesting. Do they invest in the wide receiver core around him? Does Paris Campbell finally stay healthy? Do they upgrade majorly over T.Y. Hilton, right? There's some things there that could go Carson Wentz's way. Where you do have Michael Pittman Jr. And then, of course, you have Jonathan Taylor. Like, there's a path. There's a path there for Carson Wentz to be more than just a matchup guy or a streaming quarterback. But for right now, I'm not betting on that. So he is at 19. He's higher than you guys, but that doesn't mean that I'm necessarily a full-on believer in Carson Wentz for 2022.
Not a QB1. I think that's that's pretty clear for any of us. All right, let's continue up the ladder here from 18 to 13. At 18, Matt has Derek Carr, then Mac Jones at 17. Can't wait to hear his thoughts on Jones. Tannehill at 16, Kirk Cousins at 15, Russell Wilson at 14, Justin Fields at 13. So let's start with your version of Mac Jones. Yates was bringing up an interesting point about, losing Josh McDaniels. But at the same point in time, I mean, you had to like what you saw out of Mac Jones here in year 1. He ran a pretty good offense there. It was pretty efficient with the football for the most part. And again, rookie season starting from game 1, a little bit more weapons would go a long way. But do you think there's another gear here, or do you think 17 is probably where you're going to end up when we come around August, September anyway?
I think 17 is about right. And, obviously, of course, we want to pay attention to what happens with the offensive coordinator hire. But, typically quarterbacks progress in their second season. And I'm assuming that whoever is brought in to replace Josh McDaniel isn't going to be all that big of a departure in terms of what they do offensively. And yeah, we saw Mac Jones have I would say a surprising rookie season, given what we expected out of him, given that he, wasn't as heralded entering college as some of the guys who went ahead of him in this past year's draft, given the weaponry he had around him, which, I mean, I would say, like, even though they spent way too much money to bring these guys into New England, right? Even though they paid for these guys weren't even league average as receivers last year, but somehow it's still all worked for Mac Jones. And I think we see him progress a little bit, but he still feels like more of a, like week to week, high consistency type of player instead of a high ceiling player. But I do think as a real life quarterback, we will see him take another step forward this year. But from a fantasy perspective, he's not a guy I'm going to be really excited about.
It's funny. I've got him at 17 as well. Same exact makeup there for me too. I love him as a pairing with a more volatile upside quarterback, like the Lamar Jacksons of the world, right? Where you're like, man, it could be oh so good, but you know what? I want to make sure that I've got a little bit of more floor there with my second quarterback in a super flex. That's kind of how I feel about Mac Jones. You kind of have a really nice value with him. I want to ask you about Derek Carr. Let's flip the script here a little bit. You've got Derek Carr at 18. What do you make out of getting Josh McDaniels now out there, assuming he's going to call the plays there, but maybe not? But what does that influence potentially on Derek Carr there? Do you think there's upside here at all for him in this ranking?
I think there is some upside, but I also view him as, a veteran who gives a decently high floor. He's got some decent weapons around him. I don't know how much McDaniel is going to really open stuff up within that offense. And, there is a transition. It makes me think of Matt Ryan back in the day with Kyle Shanahan coming in. That first year with the Falcons was a little bit rough. And then it was the second year in Shanahan's system where Matt Ryan had his MVP season. So even if we think that Josh McDaniels is a great play caller, he's got this veteran quarterback, there are some decent weapons around him, it might not click right away in year one. It possibly does, but it might not. But, Derek Carr, he is pretty established within that offense. He knows the guys around him. So I think he does get the opportunity to start in year one. Like, we're not going to see a Jay Cutler situation where Josh McDaniels comes in and Jay Cutler is gone. And Tim Tebow, like the next Tim Tebow is drafted, right? So
I don't think it's so unfair. McDaniels was so young when he got that chance, and now we think every coach is 29 years old nowadays. Right. But it's still it's unbelievable. I mean, to think that it was so long ago, because it really was when you look back on it, that it's taken him so long to get this second chance. I mean, I guess you could say the Colts job was his. He decided not to take it. But that's a whole other can of worms. But I think he's had enough good favor where I think we need to leave the Tebow stuff alone now and say, okay, we're not going to kill him for that. The guy was just trying to win games and try to do the best he could. But he's got to learn from that, right, Matt?
Well, by the way, the Tebow thing, I actually don't hold against him all that much. Like, I would say it was the right idea, the wrong player.
Right, you're right. Taysom Hill before Taysom Hill.
Yeah, think about how the league has gone.
Absolutely.
It is now a situation where it is uncharacteristic for a quarterback to succeed if he doesn't have at least some dual threat capability. And McDaniels was ahead of the curve on that and going with a quarterback who was basically nothing but dual threat capability. He just didn't get the right kind of guy. But, he basically got a buffed up Lamar Jackson, and it's like, hey, if the league were a little bit different, maybe it could have worked out for Tim Tebow. I think it was just a combination of McDaniels being a little bit ahead of his time and then also just the wrong player. But
he wishes he had the arm Lamar Jackson has. I can tell you, Lamar Jackson flicks his wrist and the ball goes 50 yards. It's unbelievable. Last one for you before I go to Yates' next grouping here. Russell Wilson, not a QB1 for you. I know it's going to be jarring to a lot of people. I'm giving you the floor to explain why.
Well, I mean, I don't think he's really been a QB1 for, we'll say, the past year and a half. And so some of this, bakes in the idea of maybe he goes to a new team. Maybe they change some things with the offensive system in Seattle. Maybe they continue to rely on the running game more than they should. Russell Wilson getting older. You kind of put all of these things together, but also some of it is just I'm much more fascinated by the 13 guys ahead of him on my list. Like
Fair.
This is kind of the demarcation point where I would be very happy to get the 13 guys ahead of Russell Wilson. Some of them I don't want to pay the price for, so I'm not going to end up with them. But like the 13 guys, I feel like a lot of these guys all have a decent chance of being a top 3 quarterback. But I look at Russell Wilson and I think, no, like he is not going to be a top 3 quarterback this year. So, like what separates him from some of the guys lower on the list? Well, he's got some history. He's got some good weapons, but like Wilson is someone I just don't think I'm going to be investing in this year because like he is the demarcation point for me between like guys I like and guys I really don't.
Fair enough. Let's move on to Yates' grouping starting at 18. Tua at 18, Ryan Tannehill at 17, Derek Carr at 16, Deshaun Watson at 15, Kirk Cousins at 14, and then 13, Jalen Hurts. I want to start up at the top here at 13 with Hurts because I know this was a tough one for you, Yates. Last year, obviously from a fantasy perspective, outperformed your expectations, but you still don't have him in that QB1 territory. I know it's only by one spot and we're splitting hairs, but as Matt said, there's a reason why we rank guys a certain way. So is there a reason for you why Hurts still isn't in that QB1 category for you currently?
Is he fully cemented as the QB for the Philadelphia Eagles next year? Like I know that they've come out and said like Hurts will be our starter for 2022. And it's like, okay, well, Andy Dalton was QB1 for Chicago. Like the teams say this all the time where they will say that, this is our quarterback for next year. And that's not the case. So they've got 3 first-round picks next year. Do we see them move that for a Deshaun Watson? Do we see them package 2 of those? Do we see them upgrade that quarterback position? Because from a fantasy perspective, Hurts was great. From a real-life quarterback perspective, he struggled the way that I anticipated. So I think there's a clash here with Jalen Hurts as far as what is his outlook for next year. If he is the starter next year, then for sure he's going to be a top 8 guy, someone that will just continue to get it done with his legs. It might not be pretty for the majority of the game, but he'll get it done in garbage time or he'll pick up those additional rushing yards. Like it will be there for fantasy. However, for right now, for him to be outside of my top 12, it's just baking into and taking that into account. Like he might actually not be the starter for Philadelphia next year. So just kind of as a placeholder for right now.
Minshew did have that one incredible game, that's for sure. That was a fun one. Like, I think Minshew with the right set of circumstances around him can be an okay quarterback. I just think Jacksonville was going to work against him completely no matter what. Let's talk about Deshaun Watson, shall we? And I know this is an almost impossible task, but I feel like we have to ask these questions anyway because we don't have clarity yet, but we got to try to evaluate as best we can in these early rankings. So in the current climate, the way things are in the NFL, do you think that Deshaun Watson is going to get another chance somewhere? I know oftentimes, Yates, talent always earns you that second opportunity, but this is a very different situation than some other things we've seen here in the past in the NFL. It's we can go back to the Michael Vick situation. He got a second chance. Some other players don't get second chances depending on what the criteria of their penalties against them are. But in your opinion, as a fantasy analyst only, do you think people should be investing in Deshaun Watson here in the early going, or do you think this is another circumstance where it is just so complicated you don't want a piece of it?
It's buyer beware. It's been buyer beware for Deshaun Watson since everything came out. As far as in dynasty leagues, as far as in redraft, I know there were people who were investing in him still in their Superflex redraft leagues. Like, oh, it'll get cleared. He'll be back on the field. So it all depends on your level of risk. How risk averse are you? How willing are you to take that shot with Deshaun Watson? I think that for him right now at 15 in my quarterback rankings, that is a complete placeholder. There's the potential that he doesn't even play next year. Again, there is the potential that if he does get cleared and he is in Carolina, Philadelphia, wherever, he has the potential to be a top 5 fantasy quarterback. We know that. He could be the QB1 in fantasy. So it's still all there. But Deshaun Watson, I mean, you come back and you want me to say, like, Joe, like, is he coming back and is he playing? I can't say that. I can't say that because with Deshaun Watson, we just don't know about the situation here just yet. So I've got him at 15. And I think that right now it is completely up to each and every individual fantasy player to figure out, fantasy manager, to figure out if they are willing to take that shot on Deshaun Watson, because it could easily pay off in a big way, or it could mean that he doesn't get another shot in the NFL.
I have Deshaun Watson at 13, and a lot of the same reasoning that you're talking about there. And I feel like if this were any other year where there wasn't so much need at the quarterback position, it might be a more difficult situation for Watson. But because there's so many openings at the quarterback position and so many coaches and teams in desperate situations, I feel like someone is going to get desperate and make that play for him. I don't know at the end of the day if it's going to pan out for that organization, but I feel like someone is going to. I feel like some teams wanted to this past season, preseason and in season. I think all of that was true, but at the end of the day, it didn't happen. But I think you have a whole different dynamic with the open field that is the quarterback position right now in 2022. You are going to see more retread quarterbacks, more let's give this guy one more shot kind of situations than you've ever seen in the NFL before. Is going to be the Wild West at the position, and I think somebody is going to go and try to take a shot at Deshaun Watson. For me, my 18 is Trevor Lawrence. I think this is a great time to buy back in Trevor Lawrence across the board. Go get him in every keeper league, dynasty league situation. Go do it right now, but in redraft, I still think this guy has potential to be a QB1 sooner than later. Mac Jones at 17, as I mentioned before. Derek Carr at 16. I'm giving a little bit more respect to Derek Carr than my friends here on the list. Just a little, not a lot, just a little. It was a good season for Derek Carr. Kirk Cousins at 15. I don't think we have to talk about Kirk Cousins. We all know who he is. Trey Lance at 14. Deshaun Watson at 13. Lance, I just have at 14 right now. I just want the clarity. Once I get the clarity of exactly what the 49ers are doing, I will make adjustments. But as of today, the 7th of February, as we're recording this, that's where I'm at with Trey Lance, which brings us right now to the QB1s. And let's start here with the QB1s. You've got Deshaun Watson as a QB1 at number 12, Matt. Then Jalen Hurts at 11, Matthew Stafford at 10, Aaron Rodgers at 9, Trey Lance all the way up at 8. So Matt, the Oracle, obviously already knows exactly what's going to happen. Dak Prescott at 7, Joe Burrow at 6. So Deshaun Watson, you have as a QB1. Break it down for me what your expectation is in 2022 for Watson, Matt.
I'm just taking a risk, like I'm not a risk averse drafter. I'm a little bit of a risk seeker. And, as you guys said, we know if he's on the field that he is a top 5 fantasy quarterback. Like we have the history of him doing that. I'll admit, like I'm not totally up to date on all of the news on the Deshaun Watson case, but like I still believe he's yet to be charged like by a police department with a crime. I just have to imagine that if that is the case, this next season, that somehow this legal mess is going to sort itself out, either in court or out of the courts. But as you mentioned, there's neediness at the quarterback position right now. This is a shot on upside and, sort of betting on the idea that somehow a guy who is yet to be charged with a crime will not miss a second full season. That's really all this is. Just a shot on the upside.
No, I can totally understand it. And early drafts will be fascinating. And I think, even if there's not, I would say, a trial or anything like that, you could have civil lawsuits as well. This is all far from over with Deshaun Watson. There's no doubt about that. It's just whether or not a team is willing to take this risk on and let that all play out. And it's a huge risk, let's be honest. But I think somebody's going to this year, more so than I did last year. The rest of this list, look, it's usual suspects, but you've got Trey Lance at 8. So I know Yates probably has him at 1, I'm sure, but I want to talk to you about Trey Lance at 8 for you. You are more confident in Trey Lance right now before Matthew Stafford. Talk to me and explain why.
Well, we know what Stafford is, and we'll just look at a lot of these guys on the list, right? We know what a lot of these quarterbacks are. We know what Jalen Hurts is, right? Great fantasy quarterback, not a great real life quarterback. Maybe he gets a little bit better in reality. Aaron Rodgers, we know what he is, but Trey Lance, that's the unknown, this guy. Let me rephrase this. It's unknown in that it's a small sample of, what he did in college, what he's done in the NFL so far. But what we do know is that they invested an immense amount of draft capital in him. What we do know is that in the small sample of college and the NFL, he tore it up in the ground game. We know that he's got a pretty strong arm. We know that he has an inventive play caller around him. Like as a prospect, this guy was kind of Steve McNair-esque.
Right.
And he's got a great play caller with him. Like I'm just going to say Jimmy Garoppolo is not going to start this year. This is the base assumption for the ranking that Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't start this year. I'm taking a little bit of a risk that he does, but I bet that doesn't happen. And if Trey Lance is the starter in week 1, I'm thinking of him this year the way that I was thinking about Jalen Hurts last year, as a guy who has the ability to tear it up on the ground game. But I think he's going to be better than Hurts as a passer, in part because I just think he maybe has more natural talent, and because I think he's got a better offensive play caller to put him in winning positions. So I think he's something close to the skeleton key, a guy who can do it on the ground, who's got a decent arm, and who's got the play caller to facilitate all of this.
I agree with you 100%. In fact, I would be very much in that same boat as you, putting Lance ahead of where I would have had Hurts going into this year too. The weapons, the play caller, everything you said is absolutely correct. If Rodgers goes back to the Packers, though, just asking that question, those guys are on the board. Would you take in redraft Trey Lance and that upside, or would you take the old reliable Aaron Rodgers?
I would take Trey Lance. I'll be honest.
You're a good time gal. I love you, Freedman. You're a good time.
I wanted to put him above Dak. I wanted to put him above Joe Burrow, but it's like I can't in good conscience do that, but I want to.
Right. No, I understand. I totally understand. It's a good conversation to have, because I think sometimes people will see rankings and they think, oh, well, everybody just wants the shiny new toy, but Matt's bringing up some great points there about, we've already seen a taste of it. I think the McNair comp is a tremendous one, and if you never saw Steve McNair play quarterback, I urge you, go to the YouTube and go watch and find that out. All right, let's go to Yates, your guys here. Russell Wilson at 12, Justin Fields at 11. Then you've got Dak Prescott, Matthew Stafford, Lamar Jackson, Trey Lance, Joe Burrow. So you also have Trey Lance very high. You've always been a Trey Lance guy. You've got him ahead of Lamar, though, which is a little interesting to me. Explain that for our audience here.
Back to back, so not a huge difference. But with Trey Lance, I am buying into the offensive structure around him versus Lamar's. And with Lamar, we had a fire start to the season, right? Like Lamar Jackson was just playing incredibly well. And then we had towards the latter half of the season before he got injured, the offense just kind of like fell apart. Like the wheels fell off the cart for the Baltimore offense, where it was really like, Lamar, throw it short on like curl routes, and then if that's not there, then scramble around and make something happen. Like all the deep shots just essentially vanished from the Baltimore offense. And so that's a question with Lamar heading into next year is, what does the offensive ecosystem get figured out? Does it get fixed? And then with Lamar too, injury. Like that's something too with Lamar, with how much he runs. Is the injury that we saw this past year going to be something that we have to take into account moving forward? So there's a lot of question marks with Lamar. There is absolutely the upside for him to be the QB1 over Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, these other guys at the top of the list. However, Trey Lance also does have that, and I don't have as many questions about him with the offensive ecosystem. He has better playmakers. He has a better play caller. He has, I think, a better arm than Lamar Jackson, more accuracy than Lamar Jackson, just based on my college scouting. And so I think that it's all there for Trey Lance to be this guy that we look back, we do the show next year, we look back and say, we should have had Trey Lance higher. And I think that it's so confusing why he didn't see enough more playing time this past year. Jimmy Garoppolo is gone. Like that is that's a foregone conclusion. He's gone because you cannot have Trey Lance sit 3 seasons now. You cannot have him because remember, he didn't play much in 2020. He just had 1 game. So you can't have him play 1 game in 2020, 2 games in 2021, and then have him sit again.
Well, you can. I mean, Aaron Rodgers sat for a while behind Favre. I mean, we've seen that. It's just an older model.
That was a different time in the salary cap, though, right?
100%. Well, it was still salary cap era, but still, it was.
I know, but different structure.
It's a different structure of where we're going, but it's not an impossibility. I think you're right. I think they are going to move on for Garoppolo. And when they do, I know for my money, I'm putting Trey Lance right at 10. Like, I know exactly where I want him as soon as he cracks that code there and Garoppolo gets moved on from. I just hope they don't start to buy back in on the heroic performance of hurt Jimmy Garoppolo picking up this team and taking them almost to a Super Bowl, because I agree that would be a mistake. But oftentimes, NFL teams don't care about our fantasy shares.
Well, for sure. But I think that I remember putting out with the last drive against the Rams, who was like, this drive is going to determine a lot about Jimmy Garoppolo's future, right? If he walked them down the field, it was going to be, okay, I think Jimmy Garoppolo is back next year. And then we saw what happened with the interception and everything. It was like, okay, that we've we kind of figured it out. So
I
think,
said this on last week's show, Yates, that if I was watching that game with my kids, we were hanging out. Had I just been like by myself and I was in-game betting or something like that, as soon as I saw Jimmy Garoppolo with the ball 156, all the money on the Rams, everything I could buy, there was no way I felt confident in him moving that ball downfield. And that's a problem. That's absolutely a problem. But at the same time, go ahead, continue on with your Trey Lance situation.
Yeah, with Garoppolo, like he can bring you, he's the quarterback who in that offensive ecosystem, he can bring you to the NFC Championship game. He can get you to the Super Bowl. But it's with Trey Lance when you have the upside that he presents and the impact and weight that his rushing ability puts on a defense, the stress that puts on a defense, where he will not only be able to take you to the Super Bowl, but he takes you over the hump and actually gets you the Super Bowl, because that's what Trey Lance can do with his skill set. So I think I'm saying this right now, like I think it's a foregone conclusion that Jimmy Garoppolo is gone. He'll be the starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers next year, whatever. And then we'll have Trey Lance as a starting quarterback. And I may potentially draft him as a top 5 fantasy quarterback.
All right. Well, I want to ask you about Justin Fields. I've got him at 12 in my ranks. You've got him at 11. I really like what I started to see out of Justin Fields as the season went on. He had a couple QB1 finishes. I feel like a good, healthy offseason where he can work together with the new coaching staff there. I think everything could really elevate for him very quickly. I like that you've got him just as kind of high up as I do. So talk to me about Justin Fields and your expectations for him in his second season.
Matt mentioned it earlier. Like, there's a ton of guys who could be a top 3 fantasy quarterback, and Justin Fields is one of them. What does the offense look like? What does the offense look like next year for Chicago? That we could see some stability here for Justin Fields, because last year with Matt Nagy, this offense was it was a hot mess. And so with Fields, though, even in that, we still had him finishing reliably as a top 10 fantasy quarterback when in games that he wasn't injured halfway through. So the upside is absolutely there for Fields. Do they make the proper investments around him with the playmakers? There's a lot there. So I think the upside is absolutely there with Fields. I feel more confident with him than I do with guys like Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson that we already talked about. But I'm not ready to put him over these other guys where I know what they are. With Matthew Stafford, with Dak Prescott, I know what those guys are. So if I need some stability, if I need that reliability, I'll take Matthew Stafford. I'll take the Dak Prescotts. If I want to take that shot for the top 5 upside, I'll take Justin Fields at his ADP next year.
And if you want to look at all of our rankings here, again, head over to FantasyPros.com and go click on that NFL tab, and you'll see under Draft Research, the 2022 draft rankings are up already. You can isolate your favorite, obviously, analyst or your favorite ones and compare them, which is great. For me, at 12, I've got Justin Fields, as I said. Jalen Hurts at 11, begrudgingly, I've got him there, and I have to keep him there. However, I could say right now, if Trey Lance goes up here, I would probably put Lance at 10, and then I might consider swapping Fields and Hurts. We shall see. I've got Russell Wilson safe and boring. Don't tell Matt Freedman I've got him at 10. Please don't let Matt know. Then I've got Stafford at 9, Aaron Rodgers at 8, Prescott at 7, Lamar Jackson at 6. Now, when we start to look at the top 5 guys here, Matt, you've got Herbert at 5, Kyler Murray at 4, Lamar Jackson at 3, Mahomes at 2, Josh Allen at 1. Now, like, these guys don't need a whole lot of analysis. I think we know why these guys are where they are. But you've got Lamar Jackson up even higher than I do. I want to ask you about that because I feel like this is a crucial season for him. I think this is the kind of talent, Matt, that's probably just succeeded his entire life because his athleticism is so off the charts that he literally could just outplay everybody at every level. But when you get to the NFL and they start to figure out a little bit, this is that elite of the elite, and there has to be another gear of work ethic. It has to be another gear of preparation for him. I think he's got that in him, and if he does deliver that, I agree with your ranking, but you're already there, so talk to me about why.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this past year was a bad year. I think a lot of that was because he was injured, but when he's been healthy and when he's been the starter, he's been a top 3 quarterback, and we have a pretty decent sample of him doing that across like close to 3 years now, so I'm just thinking of him as something fairly locked in as a top 3 quarterback. If he doesn't do it again, then you really have to reevaluate whether that's, is he too injury prone or is he in the wrong system? Does he not have the right weapons around him? Is he not developing the way that you would want guys to develop when they reach the middle of their career? You'd have to evaluate all of those things. But right now, I'm just kind of looking at the numbers. I'm not putting too much weight on what happened last year because he was injured. And also, I like a lot of the weapons that he's got around him. Like Marquise Brown is still a really interesting guy. They've got, for my money, if he's not the best receiving tight end in the league, and Mark Andrews, he's, top 2, top 3. He's not the well-rounded, George Kittle type who's just, throwing nasty blocks, but you don't really care about that for fantasy. As a tight end, he can definitely get it done for Lamar Jackson. They added a first-round wide receiver last year. Like, I think there are the weapons there where Lamar Jackson could end up being a better passer this upcoming season than we've seen him to this point in his career. So I think he's still a top 3.
I'm not ready to rank him there, but I completely agree with you, Matt. I really do. I think that there's that chance that it all comes together and we see something that is going to blow all of our minds. And I hope we do, because it's good for the game. It's good for the NFL. Yates is top 5 here. Aaron Rodgers, Herbert, Kyler Murray, Mahomes, and Allen. Aaron Rodgers, if he's not in Green Bay, Yates, does he still a top 5 quarterback for you?
It's Green Bay or Denver. If he's in those two spots, I will still put him as a borderline top 5 guy. If he is pretty much anywhere else, I will say he'll bounce down to where I think Matt had him at, like 9, I think is where he had him. So that's probably where. So right now he's just a placeholder. He'll move if the destination isn't as great, but I do think that if he ends up in Denver, I think he has one more year of top 5 production.
All right, for me, I've got Kyler Murray at 5, Joe Burrow at 4, Justin Herbert at 3, Patrick Mahomes at 2, Josh Allen at 1. I'm excited to see Joe Burrow next year and see what he could do, regardless of the outcome of the Super Bowl. I think we're just seeing Joe Burrow start to really come into his own, and Justin Herbert was so impressive to me. I got him, put him up there in that top 3, and we've had a different QB1 overall 4 straight years in a row, so I'm going to throw this. If you had to throw a new name out there, guys, Yates, who would be that next guy for you that could be QB1 that we don't see coming necessarily?
Trey Lance.
Of course. I mean, why did I even ask? Matthew Freedman. Give me another guy who could be QB1 overall at the end of 22.
I was going to say Trey Lance. So
you could say Trey Lance.
Really disappointed. No, yeah, Trey Lance. I think that's the answer. He's got the rushing ability. He's got the offense. He's got the arm strength.
All right, let's switch gears over to the tight end position. We're not going to go 24 deep on this, kids. Don't worry. It's fine. But I do want to ask you guys, Matt, is there a guy who didn't crack your top 12 that you felt kind of a struggle with that you wanted to put in there, or maybe you don't have clarity yet enough to put him as a true tight end 1 yet?
Yeah, 2 guys kind of catch my eye. I wouldn't say that they belong in the tight end 1 conversation, but they are intriguing, and I could see how they get there. One guy is Adam Troutman. Just dearth of other receiving talent right now in New Orleans, so you could see how he takes a step forward. And then the other guy I'm really kind of bullish on, and I want to put him as high as I can, Albert Okwuegbunam in Denver. Like, I know he's got another really good tight end in front of him and Noah Fant, but Albert O is just an athletic marvel. Yes. And I think that if Noah Fant weren't there, Albert O would be, like a top 10. Basically, I think he's like another version of Noah Fant. So who knows if 2 tight ends can really be supported in that offense, but I can see somehow there being a path to Albert O actually having more production than people think. So I would say for a guy who's the number 2 tight end on his team, he intrigues me so much.
I wonder if they move one of those guys in this offseason because, as you mentioned, they are very similar. All right, at number 12 for you still got Gronk, then Dalton Schultz at 11, Noah Fant at 10, Dawson Knox at 9, Pat Freiermuth at 8, and then Dallas Goedert at 7. So who tickles your fancy here, Matt, that you really want to talk about in this grouping here of the lower end of tight end 1?
Well, I'm just going to say, Gronk, do we even know what's happening with it? I'm just kind of assuming he's retiring,
I would assume he does. Then again, he is Gronk. He does march to his own drummer. We know that.
Yeah. So, this was sort of like an obligatory, you're still in the league technically right now. So I'm going to put you at number 12 because you're a tight end 1 when you're in the, but I'm kind of dubious that Gronk actually plays this year. So I don't think I would be drafting him. I know I have him ranked at number 12, but in best ball leagues that are going right now, I don't think I would be drafting him unless he just really falls down the board. But a guy who does stand out to me is Dalton Schultz, because I don't think there's any doubt, like, he's the tight end within this offense. Like, the Blake Jarwin experiment really hasn't worked out. Schultz, he's been pretty impressive through 2 seasons now as the number 1 tight end, and especially in the games when he's had Dak Prescott out there as his quarterback. Man, I mean, like, he's a real part of this offense. And Michael Gallup, being a guy who's headed for free agency, that maybe means we see, some more target share going towards Dalton Schultz this year. So I think Schultz, if you can get him as the tight end 11, as a low end tight end 1, he's got, like tight end 5, tight end 4 type of production within his range of outcomes pretty cleanly. So I'm happy to get him as a low end tight end 1.
All right, Yates, who just missed the cut for you at tight end 1 that you wish didn't?
There are 2 guys that I'll say could easily work their way into the top 12 by the time that we get to July and August. Logan Thomas is right outside of that range if they upgrade the quarterback position. If he comes back okay from his injury, we get some more news on that. Then I could easily see ranking Logan Thomas back inside the top 12. Cole Kmet is the other one. Do we see this offense take some major strides here? Does Allen Robinson leave? And who'd they bring in at wide receiver? Is he going to dominate targets? So I think Cole Kmet could easily be a guy who we look back on, next year and say, like, he was the late round sleeper. He was the guy that we should have been drafting everywhere. I think that he has the potential to be that guy.
Well, I'm going to learn from my lesson of always being a year ahead on guys, and I'm going to double down on Kmet because I was in on him this year. I wanted it to happen so badly. I thought even with Andy Dalton it might happen because he had a pretty good history of throwing touchdowns to Tyler Eifert once upon a time. But again, it was a whole big mess there with Matt Nagy. So pass. Redo for 2022. Your guys here starting at 12, Noah Fant, Dalton Schultz, Mike Gesicki, Pat Freiermuth, Dallas Goedert, and Dawson Knox at 7. So who do you want to highlight here in this grouping and talk about, Yates?
Gesicki is the one who's really interesting to me right now. With Mike McDaniel, we're on the eve of Mike McDaniel being named the head coach in Miami. So coming over from San Francisco, we know how integral that tight end position is to that offense. And so they've got that athletic move tight end in the same vein of George Kittle. Is he George Kittle? No, he's not. No one is. But there is the opportunity in that offense to create significant opportunity for Mike Gesicki to have a significant target share, for him to be the guy over the middle of the field. I think there's a possibility for that. So Gesicki is one that I'll be watching pretty closely as we move throughout. He's a free agent too, so maybe they bring him back. Maybe he ends up somewhere else. But if he does end up back in Miami and he gets a sizable contract, that's going to be enough of a vote of confidence for me to move him back up my rankings here to potentially in that range of like Dawson Knox, TJ Hockenson, who I've got at 6. It'd be a tough decision for me.
Oh, I agree. I like Gesicki a lot. And I've changed my tune on him. I was not a big fan of him going in. I didn't think that offense was going to work with him. But it did. But we'll see with the new coach how that all shakes out. But I was very impressed with Gesicki's ability to catch the football, too. He made some fantastic catches. He got really good hands, better than I gave him credit for earlier in the year. So I want to make sure that we learn from our mistakes. We all make them. Even the best analysts, even Matthew Freedman can make a mistake. I think one probably all year, but still. I mean, the rest of us, we have to learn from these things. Everything's not going to be perfect, but do you learn from those mistakes and try to refocus again? I've got Hunter Henry at 12, Pat Freiermuth at 11, and it hurts my soul because I love Freiermuth. I want to put him up higher, but I'm just waiting to see what shakes out. Dalton Schultz at 10, then, of course, Zach Ertz at 9. I've got Dawson Knox at 8 and Dallas Goedert at 7. Let's talk about the top guys here. Matt at 6, you've got Hockenson, then Darren Waller, George Kittle at 4, Kyle Pitts at 3, Travis Kelce at 2, and Mark Andrews at 1. So is it just as simple as Mark Andrews is the guy now after this past season, or was this an anomaly?
I think he's the guy. I mean, he was a fantastic prospect entering the league. He was, the Mackey a winner is the nation's top tight end in college. We all know how great that award is. And he's
I've got 2 of them behind me somewhere, I think. Yeah. Right.
He's progressed each year of his NFL career, but he's always been a much better pass catcher than I think people have given him credit for. And then finally this year, everyone saw it. It was undeniable how good he was. And especially in the second half of the season when he was getting Gronk, or I would say Kelce, he was getting Kelce-like type of usage, like double-digit targets on a consistent basis. Who knows if that continues, but I think it's not just that he's, one of the best tight ends in the game. He's the number 1 pass catching option within his offense. And it's not just the volume. He's pretty efficient on his volume too. So Travis Kelce starting to get a little bit older. Maybe things start to slip a little bit in the Kansas City offense. I just think it's that time. Like Mark Andrews is still ascending in terms of like his physicality, his talent, his route running ability within the league. So, I mean, I love Kelce. He's been great. I know that like Jeff Ratcliffe, who's like, the number one ranker of Fantasy Pros,
yeah.
like Jeff Ratcliffe still likes Travis Kelce, but Mark Andrews, I have to have him as the number one guy.
No, fair enough. For Yates, you've got TJ Hockenson at 6, then you've got Darren Waller at 5, Pitts at 4, Kittle, Andrews, Kelce. Hockenson, an incomplete this year, an incomplete 2 years ago. If Hockenson can stay healthy, what's your expectation for him? Could he crack the top 3, Yates?
I think it would have to take a quarterback upgrade for him to move above these other guys, where they have the guaranteed target volume. The overall state of the offense in Detroit, I don't think is going to lend itself to TJ Hockenson being that, usurping Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce, even George Kittle. I think that it's going to take a quarterback upgrade there and that offense taking some massive strides. So Hockenson is someone that I think right around here at 6 is probably where I'll have him ranked in July or August.
Get ready, kids, because we've all got 3 different number 1s. You've got Kelce. Matt has Mark Andrews. I've got Hockenson at 6, Darren Waller at 5, Kittle at 4, Mark Andrews at 3, Kelce at 2, and Kyle Pitts at 1. We have not yet begun to see the talent of Kyle Pitts. I'm telling you, he's a special player. I like his tweet yesterday, too. I finally scored a touchdown in America. I love that. It was a tweet of the weekend, without a doubt. But this guy's a freak of nature. He already had a 1,000-yard receiving season with no help around him, really. This offense was completely inept at times. They had no running game to speak of. Calvin Ridley, unfortunately, did not play for most of the season. Look, Kyle Pitts is something special, and I'm telling you right now, boys and girls, get in on that. Matt's probably right. Yates is probably right. I'm probably wrong. But if I'm not, you could be looking at somebody who could be a real value, where you're going to probably draft Kelce probably still in the 2nd round. Andrews probably in that same tier, I would imagine. Still going to be a 2nd, 3rd round value in that conversation. I don't think that's going to be Kyle Pitts. I think he might be the best ROI, and I think he's got a legitimate shot to end up at number 1 because of the skill set he brings. If they could just get a little more help at wide receiver and take some pressure off of him, and maybe, for the love of God, somebody to run the football. Please, Atlanta Falcons, find somebody to do that. All right, gentlemen, that was a really fun exercise. I feel very good about what we just did there. I felt like this was very useful, very therapeutic after the season's over to turn the page and already start prepping to go ahead. And of course, the other thing that is always inevitable here is change. And this is unfortunately the last show that Kyle Yates is going to be with us here at Fantasy Pros. He is going to go ahead and continue his adventure somewhere else. And on behalf of everybody here at Fantasy Pros, Mr. Yates, I just want to wish you, your family, all the best on this new journey. It's been a pleasure working with you, and I certainly wish you all the best in the industry or whatever it is you choose to do in the future. But we'll miss you here. And again, I want to thank you for all of your work and all of your efforts here at Fantasy Pros on behalf of all of our team here over at FP.
Thank you. This is bittersweet, obviously, to be leaving Fantasy Pros. If you want more of a detailed explanation as to why I will no longer be here on the Fantasy Pros podcast, you can find that over at my Twitter at KyleYNFL. But so appreciative of each and every listener for the support that you've given over the past 2 years that I've been here. So thankful for each and every one of you.
Well, there you go. And go check out that statement. And Matthew, thank you so much, as always, for joining us and giving us your time. I know you don't have a whole lot of it, so when you give us a whole hour, we are very appreciative here. So you can go follow him on the Twitter machine at Matt F. The Oracle over at FTN Network. Again, football analyst and chief strategist, which sounds really important. That's a really good title, chief strategist. That's a title no one would ever give me, Matt. How do you feel about chief strategist? Is that a good title for you?
It's a made up job. It sounds like you do something important, and really you just talk.
Don't say it out loud, Matt. You can't tell everybody about that kind of stuff. All right. Well, again, go check out all his great work at FTN, and obviously one of the best in the business. And Yates, you are as well. And again, we can't wish you enough good luck and prosperation in your new endeavors, obviously coming up for you in the fantasy football world. That'll do it for us, but the story of the game goes on. For Matt and Kyle, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at FantasyPros, so you can get the latest news and updates to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.